Okay, all right. I think that we are going to go ahead and get started now. And just like a huge, huge welcome to everyone who's here with us. We are so delighted that you're making time and spending time with us, Women Strong International, and to hear about how our 5-year-old women-run organization is investing in and partnering with grassroots women's organizations to promote solutions that enable women and girls to thrive in cities all over the world. My name is Geeta Mehta. I'm a founding board member at Women Strong International and president of Asia Initiatives. And it's my honor to welcome you all today. Before we get started, I want to mention just a few housekeeping items. First, please note that today's conversation will be recorded, and I hope that's okay with all of you. Second, we have simultaneous interpretation in Spanish. We ask everyone, including English speakers, to select your language preference by clicking on the icon at the bottom of the screen and selecting either English or Spanish. So please take a moment to do that now. And finally, please note that since today's event is in webinar mode, everyone except today's speakers will be muted. But that doesn't mean we can't have a good conversation. We want to hear from you. So we encourage you to share your thoughts and questions in the chat at the bottom of your screen. I hope you can see the chat button so that our speakers can respond and we can have a good conversation with you that way, the Zoom way. And now, I want to just say a few words to frame our event today. Today's discussion is a chance for us to hear from Women Strong and some of our grassroots partners about the journey we've been on together. We will learn and share what works to advance solutions for women and girls in urban communities that are underserved. You will also hear about Women's Strong approach, which is rather unique, and its origins in a different urban development project which started at Columbia University. From just a few founding women-led projects in sub-Saharan Africa, we have grown into a community of 18 organizations across 15 countries, working on education, health, violence prevention, and economic opportunity for women and girls. Now, let me introduce you to Women Strong's founder and executive director, Dr. Susan Blaustein, who's also a very, very dear friend of mine. In addition to leading Women Strong, Susan teaches at Columbia University's Earth Institute, where 15 years ago she co-founded and then led the Millennium Cities Initiative, an urban development initiative across a sub-Saharan region that I was also honored to advise on and partner with for many years. I know that Susan's commitment to human rights and women's rights, both here in US and worldwide, goes decades back. It deeply informs her thinking, and along with the lessons learned from our work in the Millennium Cities, it has led to the creation of Women Strong, which has brought us all together today. As an urban designer, architect, and development professional myself, I'm looking forward to today's discussion, to learning more from Women Strong partners about what has proven effective in advancing girls' and women's well-being in communities across the globe, especially during this challenging year, and to thinking about how women's organizations can best support their work. I have also been so inspired to have witnessed firsthand what Women Strong does all the time. That is bringing brilliant women-led organizations together to share what they know, thereby spreading their learning far more broadly so that other great organizations working in other parts of the world can also learn from their valuable experience. Let me now request Susan to introduce today's speakers and moderate our discussion. Take it away, Susie.
Geeta, thank you so much for your wonderful introduction. You've been so instrumental in helping to build Women Strong since before the beginning, and I'm so honored that you could be with us here today, so thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Susan Blaustein, the founder and executive director of WomenStrong International. I'd like to invite you, as Geeta already has, to please introduce yourselves in the chat. Just put in your names and those of your organizations and any questions or comments you may have for our fantastic speakers now and as the conversation gets going. We created Women Strong for one reason, because we've seen over and over again in low-income urban settings that women always know what they and their families and communities need in order to thrive. They simply lack the opportunity to put their knowledge into practice, to learn what works to improve the lives of those around them, and to be able to share that knowledge with others who can use it in their own communities. As Geeta said, Women Strong now has 18 fabulous grantee partners across the globe, from Afghanistan to Madagascar to Mali to Mexico to Michigan, with lots of spots in between, all powerful women-led organizations working in low-income communities in the areas of girls' education, women's health, or preventing violence against women and girls. We bring our partners together in what we call our learning lab, but because we believe, as you'll hear here today, that being part of a learning community strengthens their organizations, helping them meet the needs of those they serve and building a sense of community and solidarity among them as the true experts in what works to enable women and girls and whole communities to thrive. We're excited to share with you today our brand new 5-year report, hot off the press, so you can explore on your own where our partners are, what they're all doing, and what we've been learning. We've put the link into the chat so you can open it at your convenience. But right now, we want you to hear from the brilliant experts we're lucky enough to have here with us in our Zoom room. So let's get going. Again, just finally, to participate in the conversation, please type your questions into the chat and introduce yourselves and your organizations. And if you haven't already done so, you need to select your language preference. English or Spanish are the options here today at the bottom of the screen. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from 3 wonderful women, each at the head of terrific organizations committed to improving the lives of women and girls. Their organizations are very different from each other, as you'll hear, working on 3 different continents and focusing on 3 different areas of learning within our learning lab. Paula Sadivias Mendez is co-founder and regional advisor of Visionaria Network in Cusco, Peru, part of our girls' education group. We're so glad, Paula, that you could be here with us today. Welcome. Lamina Evangelista Suanapol is founding executive director of Roots of Health, a partner in our women's health cohort working in Palawan, Philippines. Welcome, Amina. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's late your time. And I'm saddened to say that our esteemed partner and panelist, founder and director of Rwanda Women's Network, Mary V. Balikunjeri, is unable to be with us today due to a death just this morning of a close family member. So we send Mary and her family our sorrow, and we're so grateful that Sharon Bideri, Rwanda Women's Network's Advocacy and Communications Officer, has so generously stepped up to join us here this morning here. Welcome, Sharon. We're so glad to have you with us to speak about your and your colleagues' work in preventing violence against women and girls, and about what being part of our learning lab has meant for you all. And thanks to you all so much for being with us today. I think the loss we've just learned about in Mary's family and Sharon's being able to join us on no notice only reminds us what a year this has been, full of pain and loss and resilience and some small triumphs over hardship and some very large ones. I think it brings home too the importance of community at such times. Even when that community trespasses geographies and at least at this time can only come together virtually for support, for a hug, to grieve, and sometimes to dance. One of the things I know Mary wanted to talk about was how much we have to draw on in each other and how crucial building a strong community is to advancing women's rights. So in that spirit, Amina and Paola and Sharon, let's get started. And just to get us going, can each of you please tell us who you are, what your organization does, what the local context is for your work, and why you've chosen the work you do? Paola, would you like to go first?
Okay. Hi. Yes. Good morning. Thank you, Susie, so much for that wonderful introduction. Gita as well. Thank you. And of course, very grateful to be here with this wonderful group of women presenting today. My name is Paola Saldivias Mendez. I am co-founder of Visionaria Network and regional advisor for Visionaria Peru. It's a sister organization. And we are on a mission to awaken girls' potential. Sorry, I just got distracted. Thank you. I had some water delivered. Okay. So we're on a mission to awaken girls' potential to reach their fullest ability and to become leaders in their own lives and in their communities. We work with teachers in public school, in the public school system. We provide teacher training. We design and provide a comprehensive curricula to include empowerment and leadership, and to practice a gender responsive pedagogy. Teacher uh, gender equality in teaching is important in Peru because currently the teaching experience and the learning experience for both girls and boys in the public school system continues to socialize and in many times continues to deepen gender stereotypes. And in many of these cases, in an inadvertently way, because teachers do have a narrative of gender equality. However, in many cases, their attitudes and expectations continue to be very gender biased. And so we as an organization face two challenges. For one, the need to continue to provide these meaningful learning experiences and opportunities for girls to reach their full potential and become leaders in society. And on the other hand, we are also in deep need to construct gender sensitivity in especially with teachers and in the teaching and in the educational system locally, considering that gender as a term and as a construct continues to be very limited as a society. Very traditional expectations and very limiting expectations are still imposed in both girls and boys' experiences. But of course, we are all aware of the big inequalities that are caused when girls are limited in their opportunities and exercising their full rights. So that is a little bit about me, about the work that we do. Very happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Paula, thank you so much. Yes, I think we all know how important teachers are. I'm sure everyone on this screen has had a teacher who saw past their gender, whatever their biases, and it has empowered them over the years. So it's really important what you're doing. Sharon, could you please tell us again who you are and what Rwanda Women's Network does, and just remind us of the context there and why you, Sharon Bideri, have chosen the work you do.
Good morning, everybody. I am Sharon Bideri. I am a Communications and Advocacy Officer at Rwanda Women's Network. I'd give you a brief background on Rwanda Women's Network. We were established in 1997 after the devastating genocide that occurred in our country in 1994. A lot of the people who were affected by the genocide were women and girls. I'm sure many of you know of the horrors that happened here during that time. And as a way to cope with sort of giving a response and helping those that really needed it at the time, Rwanda Women's Network was developed, created, established by Mary Balukengeri, who is our founder and our director. So we have a base or a focus on ending violence against women and girls. And one of the ways that we've done that is by creating women's safe spaces. And this is since 1995, even before the creation of the organization itself. And in the women's safe spaces, we provide an opportunity to address GBV issues, GBV being gender-based violence issues, giving the response, prevention, and helping women to live a life free of violence, basically. Since 1995, we have 14 different women's safe spaces across 11 districts in Rwanda. And even though gender-based violence is one of our priorities, we also look at the socioeconomic welfare of women. We provide healthcare and support, education and knowledge sharing, Basically, these are the parts of Rwanda Women's Network that we work under, but specifically for the project that we implement under the support of WomenStrong International, our project is called Couples for Healthy Relationships. And this is our sort of our idea of how we can innovatively address gender-based violence in our communities. And that is through educating couples, helping them understand that in order for us to eradicate gender-based violence within our communities, we have to start with the couples and then spread out to our communities. So that is our approach, and that is what we do at Rwanda Women's Network. Thank you.
Sharon, thank you so much. We're all in awe of what you do, and it's so important. So Amina, over to you to complete our round of introductions.
Thank you, Susie. Good evening from the Philippines. Good morning to all of you. Good afternoon. I'm Amina Evangelista Swanepoel, and I am the founding executive director of a reproductive health organization based in Palawan called Roots of Health. For those of you who aren't as familiar with the Philippines, here in the Philippines, women and young people's access to healthcare and education and information, especially about reproductive health, is really very limited. And there are a lot of reasons for this, but one particular challenge is the religious and cultural environment, which makes any discussion about reproductive health a taboo. So especially among young people, this just is not talked about. And this causes a lot of unplanned pregnancies, especially among young people. We have a very high rate of teen pregnancy. And we also have increasing rates of HIV and have had high rates of maternal deaths. And, young people here don't have any access to comprehensive sexuality education. And it's also very difficult even for people who know about contraception to access it. So there's this vicious cycle of poverty that just keeps going as young people, especially girls, can't control their bodies and have unplanned pregnancies, which force them to stop schooling. COVID-19 has, of course, exacerbated all of these problems, especially since young people can't leave their homes. And it's even harder to access health services as our government focuses on COVID response. So already, just 1 year on, we've already seen a spike in teen pregnancy in the Philippines, as well as increases in HIV and maternal deaths as well. So what my organization does is we have been working to try to reduce unplanned pregnancy by providing young people with comprehensive sex ed in schools, and also providing non-judgmental, high-quality clinical services through our clinics and through community-based services. And we also work with the government to try to improve their outlook and their programs on reproductive health, so that these become more integrated in their health programming. And I chose this work because I believe in women's empowerment and in feminism, which I define as a woman having the right to make decisions in her own life. And I saw that women and girls in the Philippines didn't have this ability to protect their health because of the fact that there are so many barriers to them making informed decisions about their bodies and their health. So, I really believe that reproductive health is kind of the foundation from which all other health can be attained. And since the pandemic, we've been very focused on doing everything we can to try to reduce the harmful effects that COVID-19 is having on women and girls in Palawan. And I'm really excited to talk more about this and learn more from Sharon and Paula about the work they're doing.
Amina, thank you so much. Wonderful. I smiled when you talked about working with the government and improving their knowledge, because I lived in the Philippines for 5 years, a long time ago, but I know that's hard work. And I just am in awe of what you all are doing, and it's so important for the girls and women of Palawan. So thank you. I'd love to delve in now to your experience in the Learning Lab. For our audience, all WomenStrong partners receive grants to carry out specific projects, such as Sharon has told you about in Bugacera, and to participate in our learning lab, where they have the chance, as you see here, to come together with other terrific women-led organizations working in other parts of the world to share tips, technical knowledge, and lessons learned, and to build and strengthen a community of practice that can both further their own work in the community and advance the field, whether that be girls' education, preventing violence against women and girls, or women's health. So let's start with women's health. Doesn't everything start with women's health? As Amina said, I think it's the beginning of everything, right? So Amina, how does participating in a learning lab align with your own organizational priorities? What have you learned, or what are you hoping to explore during your time in the lab?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think this is the most important thing. Although, of course, all of the aspects of the work that everyone is doing all works together for women's empowerment. The working in the lab has been really very helpful for not just me, but my two colleagues who have been the point persons for our WomenStrong projects. Because reproductive health is so taboo in the Philippines, this has always been really isolating work. And with the COVID pandemic and not being able to travel, even just regionally within the Philippines or abroad to other countries, it's felt even more isolating. So the Learning Lab was really great for giving us the opportunity to be in the company of other women-led organizations, for me, especially to be in the company of other executive directors has been really, really helpful just for us to be able to learn from each other, especially as we've dealt with this crisis that has been at such a scale that I don't think any of us have seen before. It's also been really helpful for providing us with really concrete help we've learned about best practices in terms of people in other countries who are doing similar work with slightly different contexts, but have been able to navigate, especially since COVID, different tips, different approaches that we could try. And so that's been really great. And it's also just been very inspiring to feel like we're part of this larger community. And I can't, it really is so important to me that it has been a really big emotional help and mental health help for all of us as well. It's like I said, we have had concrete tools for like strengthening our monitoring and evaluation by using new online tools and apps since we can't meet in person. But because of the fact that it's always this whole past year, it's really just been this safe space where we could talk about the problems that we're having and get feedback from other people. So yeah, it's been really fantastic. Unfortunately, I know Paula's situation was different, but for me, our lab started just as the pandemic did. So we haven't had as much chance to talk about the kind of more technical things around reproductive health that were probably planned for the year. But this year, I'm really looking forward to learning more about how other organizations are dealing with providing reproductive health information to other stakeholders like parents and teachers, as Paula's doing, as well as how to help young people have healthier relationships. So I'm really eager to learn more from Sharon as well.
Thank you, Ami. Yeah, we were in the middle of planning your retreat, right? The women's health and violence cohorts together. We were going to be in Cape Town a year ago. It's really been a very different year, but I think some of your colleagues, your fellow partners are also interested in getting more technical about the work and the learning and sharing. And you've already answered Julia's question here from the chat about learning from the other partners and programs in different parts of the world. So Paola, what about you? As Amina said, you and your girls' education cohort had the benefit of getting together in person before the pandemic. Was that personal connection important for you and feeling like you were part of a community of practitioners?
Yes, absolutely. We were fortunate enough to start and participate in the lab at the end of 2019, so December 2019. And it was wonderful. And in our experience, belonging to the Learning Lab, like adding to the very descriptive experience that Amina just shared, because everything that she mentioned, I was like, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that also. And in our case, the possibility of belonging and being part of the learning lab as a network is the possibility to access and consult and have a network have a team, actually, because besides from the learning lab, it's also the Women Strong team, but being able to ask and dialogue with experts, you know, in different areas, because we are also, Visionaria is 4 years old, 5 years old, so we're also trying to learn in the process. And for me personally, having to manage a team, we started again in 2019, so priorities were not what they have become in 2020, right? And so I did feel this possibility to tap into the experience of my colleagues. They are women that have so much knowledge. It even came into to a moment in our retreat where I was having a hard time leading my team, my high um, uh, prepared team that needs support. And so I was able to contact with Women's Justice Initiative director, or one of the women that works there. And it was definitely, I could feel the support. As an organization, we were also able to connect in a very significant way with the Girls Empowerment Network in Malawi. And together, they work in education as well. They work with teachers, teacher training, developing gender awareness for teachers, with teachers. And so we contributed together, and we have developed a collaborative learning product from our experiences working with the Women Strong, working within the lab and with the Women Strong support and funding. We have developed this guide for peer collaborators, peer organizations, to develop a gender responsive teacher training pedagogy. And this guide is going to be published also with Women Strong. Hopefully we will be able to host maybe a similar event to talk about it and present it. But also when Amina mentioned, you know, like having the opportunity to access and tap access really different resources and strategies and tips. I believe this guide that we have developed together, it's guiding through the process of designing and developing a teacher training workshop. And so by sharing this experience, Malawi is very different than Peru. We are not even in the same time zone. But you know, like finding these synergies between the work that we're doing, in spite of being in very different contexts. It's like Amina mentioned, just this feeling of not being alone and being part of a greater community.
I know, right? I mean, Takandwa in Blantyre, Malawi, figured this out just meeting you and Paul, talking about the work that you do. And I've been in Cusco, I've been in Blantyre. You couldn't have two more different places. I don't know enough about the high schools there, but a hill town in the mountains, the economic capital of one of the poorest countries on the planet. It's really quite remarkable. And I've been through this document. I know how good it is. It is a chronicle of putting together what teachers really need to know. And the work with Women's Justice Initiative in Guatemala, in the highlands of Western Guatemala, again, a completely different context, and how you all have been able to share in the case of COVID, emergency response, really, how to get the word out to your communities, how to keep track of your girls, how to make sure that they had what they needed. Sharon, what about you all? At Rwanda's Women's Network, you also, like Amina, began your grant just as the entire world shut down. So how has participating in the Learning Lab aligned with what you were planning to do and what you absolutely needed to do during the past year? And Micah has asked, you know, what are your key takeaways then from this year?
Well, as you mentioned, COVID hit right as we were supposed to be starting. Rwanda specifically went under lockdown in March, which was the time we were supposed to be starting our project. And I remember specifically when we were sent an email telling us that there's a learning lab happening, and it was the first time that I'd heard about a learning lab, and joining it, I didn't really know what to expect, but I found it to be a welcoming environment, a place for us to share, a place for us to learn. And especially during COVID, when everybody was sort of scattered around and not really knowing what was going to become of our jobs or how we were going to be implementing this project. We didn't even know how long we would be staying under lockdown. So it was such a great opportunity for us, specifically for me, because I have joined all the learning labs. So for me, it was something that was not only new, but it was an important part of the work that I'm doing with Women Strong, meeting other partners, hearing what they were going through in their specific countries and with their projects. And I remember there was one learning lab on remote programming. That was one that was very impactful because it helped us to understand how we can adapt our project during COVID times. We are lucky that we didn't have to be in lockdown for too long, and we figured out a way to reach out to our beneficiaries. Even when we had sort of restrictions, we sort of sat down and thought about how can we still implement this project even if COVID is here to stay. So we came up with our project specifically. We were aiming to have 40 couples under the Couples for Healthy Relationships. And we decided to split them into two groups so that we could adhere to the guidelines. They would have their face masks. They would have some social distance between the couples. And we would also we realized much later that this was a better way of implementing this project because we could focus on the couples more easily than if all of them were present. We got to learn about their relationships, we got to know them personally. And it was, as much as we say COVID has been a very big negative impact on the way our lives are conducted now, I can see some positive things that were brought about by it. And I'd like to mention also, during COVID, I remember Women Strong reached out to us and said, how can we support you guys during this time? And that was a great moment for us as Rwanda Women's Network, because we were thinking at the time, how can we help our beneficiaries? As much as we're separated, we cannot even walk outside of our gates. How can we support them and let them know that we're here for them and their time of need? And Women Strong reached out to us and said, guys, you can use the funds to help the beneficiaries. And we were able to buy them face masks. We were able to set up the women's safe space where we were conducting the trainings with the tap and wash machinery. We were able to get sanitizers, but most importantly, we were able to get food and hygienic materials that were very much needed by the beneficiaries at the time. So we were able to let them know and understand that we're not just here to implement projects and that's it. We really care about their lives, we care about what they're going through. And I think that was well done and spoken so loudly by what Women Strong allowed us to do. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. The way you all sprang into gear, I must say, if there were ever a proof that women know what communities need, you showed it. Because you sent us such beautiful pictures, Sharon, of handing out food and people signing in, all masked, handing out provisions, the sanitizer machines. It's quite wonderful. And I remember at one of our Mexico projects, they went out with loudspeakers on trucks because just to get the word out into community in the local language. In Malawi, I think they put flyers on kiosks. How do you get information into people's hands? Information is the most vital thing. And what you said about building trust is so important too. And the ability, so again, a silver lining, if you will, to work with fewer couples and to actually get to know them. And I sort of feel that way about you all, because we had planned a robust technical training. We have consultants who work in each of your specific areas, but as it was just coming together and sort of being together and sort of saying, how are you doing? How's your family? How's your team? What do you need? It was a way to get to know you that we wouldn't have wished for ever, but that I hope has built trust among us as a group.
Susie, I wanted to very briefly add to what Sharon mentioned, and you now as well, is I know that we were lucky enough in the learning lab and in the girls empowerment and education learning lab to meet, to physically meet and be able to share. But I also want to acknowledge, like the big value of throughout 2020, like the learning lab continued to work, and it definitely continued to be a space where, like, for example, the call that we had about remote programming, and it was very, very enrichful and enlightening and settling and reassuring, for all the partners that we were there, because it was a way, when sometimes you're doing and you're taking actions or planning or designing things, and you're really not aware or you're not sure if you're doing it correctly. But I think that space just validated all the efforts. It gave a clear path in a way for all the participants there, that like, okay, so this is what remote programming looks like. I wasn't that far off, right? And I think that the learning lab, as a safe space, I would also call it, did continue to work. And I think that's a very valuable benefit that as organizations I feel we receive, because um, just the isolation of not, or the need maybe of reassuring that your programming and your planning is on track, and you're not going to be railed off after this lockdown and having to change things. And this was like, the learning lab experience was just a very reassuring space of both, personally, like Amina mentioned, like a safe space to attend to, but also a safe space in the sense of programming, just reassuring that our work as organizations, continued to be on track. I would say.
Hmm.
Paula, I echo what you were just saying. I had mentioned about the mental health support because I was really impressed and blown away by how important it really was. Women Strong didn't just say that and leave it. I mean, I remember there was even one learning lab session that was just focused on self-care and on, it was meditation techniques and yoga, and it was just great. But as you said, for me, one of my biggest takeaways was the fact that just the universality of COVID and what everyone was going through, because that whole situation, it continues, but especially at first, was just so isolating. So being in the lab and learning from what everybody else was going through, really just helped us to see, like, okay, this is the situation. Here are some things that we can try, and here are the things that other people are facing. And so, for me and my team, that really stood out in the first year. And the fact too that with Women Strong, it's always kind of felt like more of a mentoring relationship rather than just reporting. And I think one of the best things about the lab, for me and my two colleagues who participated regularly, was not just being able to learn from everybody else, but also being able to contribute. I know that it felt really great for us when we would have a suggestion for somebody else, when we were able to say to someone, hey, like, we tried this and maybe this will work for you. And especially if we heard back later that it did help, that was also just really, it really made us feel good and made us feel like we were not only benefiting from this community, but we're adding to it as well.
Oh,
Yes, definitely. I would agree with that.
well, in tune with that, Mara here in the chat just asks, so given your experiences over the past year, what have you learned about what makes it easier or harder for you to show up in these virtual spaces in the lab? And how can we or other funders improve the accessibility of offerings like these to organizations like yours? Thank you, Mara, for the question.
I would like to address, not really answer, because I think we can all answer the question, but I think the easy part of being at least trying to participate as much as I could, I think it's because of this exchange in the sense that you get a, like what Amina said, you realize that this is the situation, but you also get a grasp of like how how it continues to work and how it continues to build, and being part of these like transformations. For example, when listening to Amina and Sharon's presentation, Amina was talking about sex education being a taboo and not being able to really talk about it, and how teen pregnancies have been spiking in the last year. And I was thinking about, and we on the other side with Visionaria, we work on talking to teachers and letting them know, we need sexual education. And also when a girl is pregnant, because she also mentioned dropping school, when a girl is pregnant, it's usually because of the gendered expectations. It's usually a burden that the girl carries, right? Because in school they don't talk about the boy who's now going to become a dad. They talk, and because it's obviously more physically apparent, but they like the social burden falls, not recalls, but falls on mainly on the girl, on the girl student, on the female student, and she's the one dropping out of school. And so or when listening about Sharon's project about the couples, and thinking that when we work with teachers, we also try to work not only on their teaching skills and strategies, but also their own and their personal gender biases, right? And so how our work is interconnected, and just being in a space when you can realize and acknowledge that, I think that for me that was kind of like the fuel that kept me going, even when sometimes I didn't want to join, or even when sometimes I didn't want to like open my camera for everyone to look at me or see me. But it's still the easy part. I think it's just what stays behind after these conversations, and I just feel like pumped up with energy. And the difficult part, I guess, like the emotional burden that comes with dealing with everything that's going on in the world and in your organization, and just the hardship of the moment, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Laura Hunt, whose organization works in Nepal, has a question for Sharon about, will you be printing a guide for the curriculum for your couples workshop? And again, just to imagine the lessons from Rwanda applying in Nepal. And why should they in Nepal have to reinvent this if you all have done it? And so the ability to learn from and share with each other just seems to me ever more important. But Sharon, it was a question for you.
Thank you. We do have a couples curriculum that we developed, and that's the one that we use the training to use on the training of the couples. Within the couples curriculum, we have topics on gender, power relations, finances, emotional tortures that can happen, intimate partner violence, so it's a range of topics that not necessarily would have to be given to couples, but something that we should all know and should all understand, so that we can be all together in the fight towards eradicating gender-based violence. But it's a very simple, very well put together curriculum. Most of the couples that we were training in our first year are educated couples, but I would say that even those who are not particularly educated, this curriculum would be able to reach them. They would understand the topics. And very much so, what we try to do with the project is that even during our training, we would focus on one topic and then would sort of break out into groups and discuss different questions. So one in particular that was a very exciting one was we asked the men and the women to separate into groups, and we told them to chart down 24 hours of a woman versus 24 hours as a man. And we found that it was one of the most exciting topics there, because through looking from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, what does a woman do compared to a man? And it's brought about very invigorating discussions between everyone, including us who are the trainers. You know, it was very interesting to hear what everyone thinks a woman does during the day compared to what a man does, you know. And topics like that are something that we should be able to share with our communities, which we're also planning to do. The couples from our first year of the project, we're selecting some of them to be community activists. They will be reaching out to the communities in Rwanda, we sort of have meetings that occur with communities in the small cells or small sectors. So they would go to such places, and the plan is that they will pick topics and speak to people there and, you know, sort of get them to understand gender-based violence better. But the curriculum is one of my favorite things to have worked on. It was not just a bunch of words. There's very many exercises requiring them to draw what a perfect woman is, a perfect man is, you know. So it gets them engaged, even the ones who are not very well spoken or are shy. You'll sort of see them, you know, putting in their input and wanting to be heard. So yeah, couples curriculum is amazing, and we'll share it.
Activity in Visionaria in our curriculum with to start working in teachers gender sensitivity, but instead of so the difference is that we separate them again in boys in groups of women and men, and we ask men to describe women, you know, like what they do, how they think, and and how they feel, like their emotions, and then we ask women to describe the same for men. And we make sure that before we share, we make sure that we tell them, we remind them not to get things personal. We're not talking about you specifically, because it is very interesting, like you mentioned, to, well, in your case, to see what the other person thinks you're doing all day. But in our case, it's also very interesting, because it also helps us identify the different stereotypes, you know, that we use to describe men, women within the, just in general, regarding relationships or work or leadership also. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
Well, I've been in Bugesera, and I know who's doing the work there and who's sitting around. So I'm sure it's fascinating. Spencer, of one of our partners, Men Stopping Violence, has asked, what are the aspirations of support or resistance that you get from the men in your respective programs? So anybody can jump in on that one.
In our case, just to share a little bit, our program works in co-education, both with students and of course with teachers. And this is actually something that we were talking about some days ago with different groups, and about deciding to work with men and boys. In our case, in Visionaria, we started out working only with girls, our leadership institute, our Visionary Leadership Institute, before we became, before we started working in the educational system. And it was the decision of working with boys and men. It was actually also inspired and motivated because our girls, the girls in our programs, they were asking for their brothers or classmates in school to have the same experience of redefining leadership, recognizing agency-based empowerment in their life. And so as an organization, we decided to continue to look for a more sustainable way of working. And we entered the educational space, and we have been working co-ed since then. However, I do think it did become a very organic way of working. It wasn't, in our case, in our experience, working with men and boys did not require like an additional space for thinking or designing. And to answer the specific question of what are like the difficulties or rejections, maybe in our case, we came to realize that it's both for men and women, like female and male teachers, when their ideas are very gendered biased. So it's not necessarily that it's men or women thinking, that creates the different thought. It's actually the thought creating these reactions and expectations. So we address the social construct, more than addressing men and female teachers or male teachers specifically, in our case.
We saw among our founding partners in their girls' clubs that it was the boys and the male teachers who wanted the same for the boys. And they were right. They were all right. So we started using the same curriculum for the boys in Kenya and Ghana in particular. And it worked, fairly well. I mean, we never did a full evaluation of that particular program, but we were able to compile the learnings from all the girls and boys clubs, some 14,000 girls and boys, I think, from India, Haiti, Ghana, and Kenya into our Girls Club's Handbook, which Julia Fan of WomenStrong authored. And it's quite beautiful. It's on our website. You can find it. But Sharon, I was thinking about that when you were speaking, because the chapter on violence, I remember being treacherous to write. Julia did a ton of research. We all thought about it a lot, but how do you address this? And it was meant to be a teacher's manual, but of course there are girls clubs leaders, out of school using it. And the drawings were also meant to appeal to adolescent girls. So it's just and the whole business was about empowering girls to speak up and boys to be champions and allies and respectful of girls. So it's just tricky what you've done, and I'm sure that our audience here would love to see the curriculum and be able to learn from you all. So thank you for that. Amina, did you want to say anything about the men, working with men in your program?
We have not had as much programming specifically for men in our communities, but we have our curriculum for young people, and that is for both boys and girls in public schools all over our province. And pre-COVID, our team was teaching about 20,000 young people per year. So it was this very important avenue for providing information. And one of the most important things I think that we tried to tackle in those sessions is this idea of what is a healthy relationship and consent, the idea of consent, because the Philippines is a very macho culture. And when we were doing some research and interviewing girls who had teen pregnancies, when we would ask them to describe their first sexual experience, almost all of them described rape. And they didn't call it that, but it was, time and time again, they would say, well, I didn't really want to, but he made me. I didn't really want to, but he kept asking, he said we had to. So it was just, it was really eye-opening for us to see that just like with a lot of things with reproductive health, there aren't even adequate words to describe what people are going through. We also try to tackle gender identity and gender expression, gender biases. There's not really a word in Tagalog and Filipino for lesbian. It's like tomboy, which so it's just that it just, there are so many things lacking in our conversations about sexual and reproductive health. And it is so important to make sure that boys and men are part of those conversations. So that's kind of our entry point with the boys, with the work that we do, is just trying to not just teach about sexuality and how pregnancy happens, but actually talk about rights and healthy relationships, talking to each other, being able to decide together if and when to start a sexual relationship. And so schools in the Philippines have been closed since March 2020. So I have no idea when we'll be able to get our teachers in front of the kids again, but that's something that I really hope we can continue to tackle with them.
That's so important. So Teresa from our partner, Centro Mujeres, writes that in their work with teens, they also have a strong focus on consent as part of the curriculum, because forced sex is such an issue with young girls. So again, Western Mexico, Baja California, and Palawan, Philippines, but these challenges are so universal, and so are some of the solutions. And speaking of solutions, please check out solutions.womenstrong, our new digital report, which has been put in the chat and which shares some of these amazing projects and their work. Amina, there is a question for you about in COVID times, it is quite difficult there. I mean, we're empathizing with you because I know you said the case numbers and mortality rates are actually higher than in India at present. It just hasn't gotten the coverage in the Philippines. So what does WomenStrong and the donor community really need to think about in the pandemic as it rages on, here and in other countries? Is there anything we can do at this distance to help?
Well, so I know what I had mentioned about the Philippines and India. I'm not actually sure if that's still accurate this week. As of last week, it was, just of course, numbers wise, India's situation is much grimmer, but the Philippines has had a really tough time trying to gain control of the situation. And I know that our local government has been writing to everyone they can, ambassadors and people they know in government in other countries, basically asking for any help to get the vaccines here faster, more help for some of the medications that are used in hospitals for people with really severe cases of COVID. So there on one level there's that kind of help that's being asked for, and I know just from what I've read from friends and colleagues in India that they really need things like oxygen, and so there's that type of thing. In terms of funding partners and other people maybe here watching today who have grantee partners in India, or other countries like the Philippines, other places where COVID is really bad. I think a really important thing is just to acknowledge how hard it is and to remember moving forward that it is different in every different country now. I think, it's so bizarre actually when you think about what happened last year, because of the fact that for once it was something happening everywhere and we all could relate to each other because we were going through the exact same thing for those first couple of weeks. But now it's really different. And, those of you in Europe and in America, places like Israel, it's New Zealand, you have your light at the end of the tunnel. There is normalcy coming back already. But for many of us in developing countries, we are still years away from that. So I think it's probably going to really take some reminding to partners to remember that everybody's in a very different situation now, and to recognize that some things that may be possible now in some contexts may still not be in others. And I think that would be a really big support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of patience is in order. We can just think back to how we felt a few months ago, and also trust in you all to know exactly what's best at any point. And I wish, well, that's my whole thing. I wish funders would just listen to those on the ground, right? That's why we have all these brilliant people in the room with us here today. So
I wanted to add on what you were saying about trust, and it's also something that as this group of, talking here, I know we addressed also this element of and of like trusting, and like you mentioned, or like the question I think also was, what does it take, for us to continue to work? And I think that when we talk about trust, it's not in the emotional way of trust, but it's in the sense of, yes, acknowledging and recognizing that what we need is the work to continue to happen. And the ones that are on the field are the ones that know how to make this happen and alternatives and strategies. And I think that's important also when we maybe reflect or analyze what does it take for organizations like ours to continue to work. um, we know what it needs, and I think that from the funder side, we need the funders to understand and again acknowledge our uh, recognition, or not, maybe that's not the term, but just our knowledge
Your
from the field, our expertise. So it is trust our expertise, trust our years, trust our numbers, trust our processes, because we, like they have taken time to design and develop and validate. But if we continue to work with those, is because we have invested the time to design and develop and validate.
Mm.
I wanted to add something, if that's possible.
Sure.
On the Rwanda context, we were very blessed to be able to sort of curb the spread of COVID-19. Our government sprung into action as soon as the first case was announced here in our country. And so far, there's a large number of people who've already gotten their vaccines. So we're looking forward with a little bit more hope that we will be returning somewhat back to normal and we'll be able to be implementing the project as it was designed to be implemented. But I wanted to add also what funders can be doing in this time. Like Amina mentioned about us being on different levels. We're all fighting COVID and some are doing it much faster than others. But I would want to take the example of what WomenStrong sort of showed us last year with their support during our time of need. That's the most important thing. And that really showed that you're not only here to implement a project, get it done, and that's it. You really thought about the beneficiaries and they are the heart of the project. So I would say to the other funders that it's important to think of people, not just as numbers because we're doing a project, but as real human beings who are going through some things just as we are. So to really think about how they can help the beneficiaries as people, and then think about how we can continue our work once that is done. And that is what was able to be done on our side once we took care of our beneficiaries, providing the food, the hygienic materials. It was such an amazing feeling, atmosphere to be around when people would just say, you guys really came out here during our time of need and you helped us out. And there's nothing that you would ask of us right now that we would not be able to support you with, So that sense of community that was brought about just because we were able to support them through the help of WomenStrong. So I would say to other funders, think of people as people and reach out to them and how can you help them now? And then, how you can help them with implementing the projects later. Thank you.
Yeah,
So
and
important.
if I could just build on what Sharon was saying, I mean, it is incredibly important to also what Paula was saying about trusting the grantee partners and believing in their ability to make decisions that make sense. And similar to what Sharon was saying, because of the fact that it is such an important aspect of WomenStrong's funding for us and approach, the fact that the funding is unrestricted. And because of that, it really allowed us to be nimble as we were dealing with COVID, similar to what Sharon was describing. We were able to immediately be able to say, like, okay, what do we need to do? And not have to ask, and where are we going to get the funds? Because we knew that we could reallocate the funding from WomenStrong towards whatever it was that our stakeholder partners needed at that time. So, in our example, in our experience, it meant that when the pandemic began, we could be really flexible with our plans. We were able to provide support to the communities, similar to what Sharon was saying, we were able to buy personal protective equipment for our clinical teams and for our community health workers who were on the ground. We didn't have to let go of any staff during the lockdown period, which is huge for nonprofits, for NGOs. You know, so many organizations had to close because of COVID, and you know, we didn't have to let go of any staff, and so that meant that we could continue providing services. You know, our clinics, we were forced to close our clinics, but we were able to then take our staff into communities to provide community-based care. And had we had to fire staff because of lack of funds, we wouldn't have been able to do that. And it also meant that when our hard lockdown ended and we were able to reopen our clinics, our staff was ready to hit the ground running. And you know, they had you know, they could do the work, and we could get them all the gear they needed to stay safe and also keep our clients safe. So you know, at a time when so many organizations have had to close, WomenStrong support has made sure that, you know, all of these organizations that you support have been able to thrive. So I think that you know, of course, nobody could have predicted, well, I was going to say nobody could have predicted COVID. Maybe there are some people who did, but nobody could have predicted what a huge life-changing event would come around. But because of being flexible and putting that trust in the grantee partners and saying, okay, we believe in your lived experience, you know what is best for your community, that is something that will benefit any funder, I think, and their partners, no matter what kinds of you know, global events happen in the future.
Mm. Well, it's so important to know, and we just saw you again spring into action. I mean, when you resumed the clinic work, you know, under COVID precautions, I mean, it was really remarkable what Roots of, and out in the community, what Roots of Health has been able to accomplish. Lizelle from our partner, Mujeres Aliadas, says to you, we do see light at the end of the tunnel in Mexico with vaccinations occurring at a relatively good pace. Thank you, Amina, for explaining how it's going in other places. It helps us assess what we have here. And that made me think about some of the things you were saying, being in touch with each other, that sometimes, you know, you're faced with a crisis that may be very local, and it may require a technical fix, or it may be just something overwhelming, you know, some loss or threat of loss. And then just to hear about what's happening in the Philippines or what's happening in Baja California, you know, it changes the frame, and it may help broaden your view. And lo and behold, you find an answer, you know, even when it's not sort of directly connected, because what she has said makes you think about something else that is actually, you know, your light at the end of this very particular tunnel. So I guess we have to take our learnings and our successes where we find them. But in the learning and capacity building department, what can other WomenStrong and other organizations or funders that are investing in capacity building among women's organizations do differently, or learn or adopt from your own experience?
From our experience and our perspective, being when it comes to capacity building and just, you know, being able to keep up with the trends and keep up with strategies and programming, just fostering this space, I think, as a strategy for capacity building, the learning lab model or experience talks a lot about it, and really like responds this need of you know, staying in front and staying connected and being able to receive information, receive resources, access resources. Um, for example, if I think about, I developed the gendered guide for Visionaria, and just the amounts of time and hours and days spent in research was huge and immense. But if by sharing our experience, like sharing our guidebook with other organizations, we can save them at least half of that time, then we're progressing as a sector. And I think that that type of peer training or peer building, you know, like as a strategy of capacity building, I think is very valuable.
Yeah. Some Mike here from New York asks, do you all think this newer flexibility, I think this is a question for WomenStrong, that you've learned through COVID will be something your organizations continue to utilize? So I'll just say on the part of WomenStrong that it has absolutely shifted our funding model and has absolutely confirmed our trust and the whole sort of premise of WomenStrong, which is building up women and girls in communities through those who know best, and that is you. So, but from you all, does it change in any way you're thinking about your relationship with funders, or, you know, what you're going to be able to ask for going forward?
In my experience, I mean, we are really fortunate because we don't have that many funders, but the ones that we do have a similar viewpoint as WomenStrong in that they're very supportive. They're not all unrestricted, so it's been a little bit of a struggle just to kind of realign on projects that we just simply can't do at the moment. But I think that fundraising is going to be really difficult, you know, especially for next year. I feel like in 2020 there were a lot of funds that were reallocated to, you know, to basically address COVID situations in whatever aspect of work we're doing. But I think that now that there is some normalcy returning to some places, I think that probably some funds are kind of going to zero back in on their main focus. And I think that some other areas, unfortunately, reproductive health is always something that has not been as funded as something at, say, like water, or, you know, I mean, there's just really different levels of funding. So I think it's going to be really important to find funders who understand the local context and understand that things are constantly shifting still because of COVID. Something that we could do last week, maybe we can't do tomorrow anymore because of a sudden change in policies or in the situation. So I think it is just, this has shown us that we really need to find and cultivate those partners who understand. I think, as Paula was saying earlier, that we're human. You're dealing with humans who are doing this very human work. So we have to just make sure that there's always understanding of what is possible and what may not be.
And I would like to add there that this doesn't necessarily, like, flexibility does not represent, you know, like being disorganized or not being, you know, like not having confirmations or not having like reports or structure thing. Like, flexibility doesn't mean less structure. It just means a different kind of structure. It means that, again, like taking from Amina's example, maybe sometime something that I had planned to do last or this week, I won't be able to do it in 10 days, but I will make sure that I let you understand and show you the reasons why I can't do this. And I will show you that the alternative will work because of. And so, yeah, I think it's important to recognize and also acknowledge that flexibility and trust doesn't necessarily mean like total disorganization and, you know, like I'm gonna give this away. No, we can still be organized and still present, you know, reports and products and results even more effectively.
So
Yeah, and
WomenStrong gave up on some of our reporting requirements and basically said, what we want to hear from you is what you're learning. And that can be about how you've responded to COVID. That's what Women's Justice Initiative, who you mentioned before, in Guatemala did. They put out a beautiful blog about their response. Essentially, they're becoming an emergency humanitarian organization overnight. And you, Paula, were able to go ahead with Janet in Malawi and produce what you had planned, your learning product as you had planned. Really, it's up to everyone. But we didn't need the kind of by the book log frame narrative report. We trusted you to know what's best. And also we extended the grants to all of you because you're so wonderful. We want you to have more time to do what you plan to do or to change with responding again to the needs in your communities. Maybe what you had planned to do is no longer relevant. In the case of Madagascar, our project there, they've developed over this time the relationship with the Ministry of Education, and they're expanding their adolescent reproductive health program throughout the province. It's quite remarkable. Again, a wonderful public and nonprofit partnership such as you have, Amina. Anything else about that, about what other funders can learn, or about investing in learning in general, emergency or not?
I would say that the Learning Lab has given us an opportunity to share and to grow with each other and share our challenges as well. And to potential funders, I would say that this is something that you could replicate with the partners that you have. It gives them a sense of community, gives us a sense of community. It helps us to understand that we're not in this alone and there's solutions to problems. Like Amina and Paula had mentioned before, when we attend the learning labs, you sort of hear how somebody else is implementing and what they're going through. And you know, you can pick and choose what works in your context. And for us, that has been successful, especially with the remote programming, or even one of the learning labs was on how we should be reporting, different ways of reporting. And sometimes it's things that we didn't even really think about that we could use in our own projects. So learning labs are important. And if we could replicate that across all partners, all projects, all funders, you know, that would be something that everyone could sort of learn from, and it's an advantage to all of us.
One of our hopes, Sharon, has been that not just you and Mary, but some of your staff could participate as well in the Learning Lab. That goes for all of you. Have you been able to find that? Mara asked here in the chat. Have you been able to enable their participation? And what are the barriers to greater staff participations? Because we're trying to build strength, right, among the people who are in touch with those in the communities.
I would say for us, there's been, I think it's WomenStrong is one of the funders that is most spoken about when we're having our meetings. And everybody sort of says, wow, you guys have such great funders, you know, that you're able to learn, you're able to share. And some of these things that I have picked out from the Learning Lab, I have shared with my colleagues, and they've been able to adapt that into the projects that they do outside of WomenStrong. And I would say that there's a keen interest from my colleagues to join. The only barriers would be, for many of them, they're field officers. So when they're out there during the field, they can't really participate, you know, or listen in because connectivity can be an issue. You know, the weather could suddenly change and, you know, they're not able to participate. But we're hoping that this year we will be able to include colleagues who are also part of different projects so that they may learn, because what we are learning from Learning Lab is something that we can all use in our everyday life as implementers of the project.
And I wanted to adding on what Sharon mentioned. In the case of Visionaria, we are a small group. Actually, we are, you know, like the staff is about 6-7 people, and but we did find, I think that we have worked around the way to benefit as, you know, as a team from participating in the Learning Lab and just belonging to this network. And for example, some of the activities we do when because the Learning Lab experience also enables spaces such as this that has simultaneous translation, and then the team can participate. And another strategy that we use, aside from what Sharon mentioned, I also share, you know, like what I think it's important and just resources with my team. And also we invite within our team, you know, like when we have specific conversations or Zoom calls or resources, because I know my staff and I know the areas of my organization, I'm able to like guide them. And, you know, like I want to ask this person in my organization to participate in this specific webinar or this specific conversation because, you know, like he's on the field or she's developing material, so they will benefit on this and that way. So I think that the entire experience of the Learning Lab, like it helps you as a programming, as you are programming within your organizations, but it also helps you as a leader. I feel I have improved my leadership skills, and I feel that um, like having adequate resources that I can access to through this network enables me to better work and better support my team as well.
Amina, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, we've been able to have other people on our teams join as well, and I think it's been really valuable. It's been especially valuable for our monitoring and evaluation, because I think in the past, M&E was kind of like, it's something that we always did for projects, but the team kind of had a role in each of the projects, but didn't necessarily have as much of activity and presence as a team. And with WomenStrong's focus on the learning question, and what are we actually trying to learn here, not just what are the results, but what are we trying to learn, and then what have we learned, and what are we going to do with that learning, has really helped to not just our program staff, but also for our M&E staff to kind of become more integrated in our program planning, which I think is a huge bonus for us. And so that's something that I think, as Sharon mentioned, we're always talking about WomenStrong and that approach, because we don't have any other funders whose main M&E component is, what are you trying to learn, and what have you learned? What are you going to do with it? So I think that's key. And then I just wanted to add one last thought, just, when we checked in last week and Mary was talking a little bit about their work, I was really struck by her, her saying that a big takeaway is the importance of localization. And I think that that's something that we've been getting at with what Paula was saying about trust, and we're talking about like the unrestricted funding, because you believe in our decision-making capacity, and it is just so important to keep that localization idea at the forefront. Because Susie, I think you were saying in a conversation we had before about how it can look so frustrating from abroad to see when huge sums of money are being cascaded through international NGOs that are doing some very valuable work, but in some places are not able to contribute as well as a local NGO that knows the local communities would be able to. So I think that that's something that, for other funders who are listening right now, no matter what your structure is, you can always just integrate this thinking of let's localize, and let's make sure that the people that we're supporting are the ones on the ground who know the community and know what they need.
Thank you so much, Amina. I could talk to you all day, but I'm afraid we need to wrap up. But I think localization is a really good point. The United Nations has embraced that. They talk about localizing the Sustainable Development Goals. They do respect the need for individuated responses in different contexts. So now that you've all heard from these fabulous women leaders, please check out our website. And I think that our partners page was shared in the chat to learn more about their organizations, their work in their respective communities, how it is indeed localized, and about all their terrific sister organizations, some of whom we've heard from here in the audience today. We're also thrilled to share with you the link to our new digital 5-year report, which will give you some background on WomenStrong, the thinking behind and the evolution of the Learning Lab, what we're learning so far, and our vision for the future. And speaking of our future, and in response to a question in the chat from Michael about finding concrete opportunities to build back better, next year we'll be launching our Economic Security and Opportunity Lab cohort, thereby completing the initial 4 areas of learning within our Learning Lab. Particularly as the world emerges from the pandemic with the spotlight so bright now on the disproportionate burden of this global emergency on women, we look forward to learning what works to help women and families build sustainable economic assets and financial security. From today's conversation, I think we have a slide for this to show sort of some of the takeaways about the value of learning and sharing among peer women's organizations. First of all, to ensure robust learning and sharing, WomenStrong recruited a critical mass of excellent, similarly sized organizations, all eager for collaboration and peer exchange around topics of shared interest. Second, we've taken a flexible approach, as you've heard, in our funding, responding quickly when the pandemic hit, which has removed some barriers and created trusted relationships that have strengthened our grantees' ability to take risks. Third, our Learning Lab partners have told us how highly they valued the responsive capacity strengthening they've received, which has helped them meet their tailored needs. And finally, by focusing on learning and on regular feedback, we try to ensure that our grant making and programs remain in tune with the evolving needs and interests of the women's organizations we support. Taking another step back, though, probably the most important takeaway is that we at WomenStrong really trust women to lead. That goes for the funding, the decision-making, the sharing of information. After all, what women learn, they inevitably share or teach. It's just innate, I think, this generosity, the will to help one another. What we found at WomenStrong is that the commonalities amongst our partners so far outnumber the differences, as you've heard here and as you've seen in the chat, whether across geographies, politics, or cultures, and patriarchies. Regardless of where one is coming from, they're powerful experiences and findings that we can see being replicated and adopted elsewhere, or that at least can be translated and readily adapted to so many settings worldwide. Having heard today from three such experienced, able, and inspiring women about the value for them in learning from each other, I imagine that you'll agree with us at WomenStrong that all of those interested in advancing the rights and well-being of women and girls really need to listen to women when they tell us what they need. We need to let women lead to ensure that they get what they need, and we need to help amplify their already powerful voices so that as many as possible can learn and really benefit from their experience wherever they are on the globe. I want to thank Itameta for opening our session and welcoming all of us so warmly. And I want especially to thank Amina and Paola and Sharon for thinking aloud together and for sharing so much of yourselves and your experience with all of us. And thanks to you all for your great questions and comments. We're going to save them and read them and learn from them, and for the engaged conversation online, and for joining us here today. Please do check out our WomenStrong digital report at the link attached here. We'll be sharing with you the couples curriculum from Rwanda Women's Network and the joint learning project from Visionaria Network and Jeanette Malawi. Please sign up for our emails and please be in touch. Thank you again, everyone, for coming today. So wonderful to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.